Hey guys! I don't know why that's become my intro, but I just did it a couple times and then it kind of stuck, so I just kept doing it. But anyways, hello, I'm Mimine, aka Mimi, and I'm with HoukagoCardTime now, yay! Which is new and interesting and exciting. And this is just a very new chapter of my life, and so since I'm opening a new chapter of my life and a new chapter of content creation with Vanguard, I figured I'd start it up with the oldest and first chapter of content creation and first chapter of any Vanguard that I've done, which is Regalias. Regalias were the first deck I ever played. The trial deck number 13 was the first Vanguard product I ever bought, and this has been one of my favorite decks since then, and I'm so happy that it's finally like a meta deck in premium. Like, people are really giving this deck a lot of credit, considering it one of the best decks, even in this weird Wild West state we have going on right now, where no one's really sure what the actual best deck is or what the real meta is. This deck is still getting a lot of attention, and it's still doing very, very well, so you can be happy taking this to pretty much any level of event as long as you play it well and know what you're doing. So, let's take a look at said deck. We have a couple of things to talk about in this deck. First off, we have a V starter. Just use a VE starter, people, please. Like, unless you're like using Cat Knight and High Boots or like Enigmatic Assassin or something equally broken, just use a V starter. Draw a card plus get a quick shield. It's literally a free +2 to hand. Just use a V starter, people. Come on now. We have literally the heart and soul of the deck, which is Yggdrasil plus Norn. Yggdrasil is really, really nice. She gives all of our rear guards with Divine Gauge boost, as well as giving them some protection if she's on the Vanguard circle, which is very nice. Helps us keep our board when our opponent tries to get rid of it. And she searches out our Norn. Norn is really wonderful because she lets any of our units restand. It's actually insane what you can do with Norn. Literally anything that this deck has access to, because we're pretty much always going to be on a Regalia name, Norn lets us restand it. So, yeah, any power plays Genesis has access to, they now come with a free restander for ditch a Divine Gauge and ditch a card from hand. Yeah, I don't know why this card exists. This is really, really powerful, but, you know, I love it. Speaking of Regalia names, our other grade 3 is Regalia of Wisdom Angelica. This is essentially a worse version of Yggdrasil, but she works only on Vanguard Circle, and we needed more grade 3s in the deck because we generally want our Yggdrasil on rearguard so she can give our units boost even when we have a stride on. So we have Angelica here just so we can have something with a Regalia name on our Vanguard Circle, and she's pretty decent. She still gives protection. It's worse protection than what Yggdrasil gives, but it's still decent protection, and all of our Divine Gauge rears get plus 5,000 power as long as she's our Van, so helps them avoid some of the attacks coming in because that is a continuous during your opponent's turn as well. For the rest of our Regalia names, we have Var and Thrud. These are basically just here because they're the V Regalia names. They're like the best Regalias we had access to, and we need as many Regalia names as possible. Their skills are pretty good. Var lets us countercharge and soul charge. Thrud lets us get some Divine Gauge as well as cycling herself, so we can like generate some Regalia names in soul while drawing some cards. They're pretty good, but their skills are not really what you play them for. Hemera, nobody plays this card. This card's insane. Trust me. This is like my personal tech for the deck that nobody else plays. Even the pure variants don't play this card. I heavily, heavily recommend this card. It lets you pick any 3 names, 3 Regalia names from your drop. They don't have to be different names, and they don't have to be exactly 3. So if you don't have 3 in your drop, you can pick 2. You can even pick 1. And it lets you just shove them into soul. This is so, so good. It allows you to reuse your skills multiple times. It allows you to, if you guard with a Regalia name, because Vars are 10k shield, so like, hey, that's pretty nice. You can guard with Var and immediately put it back into soul. We want as many Regalia names in soul as possible, and this just helps us get it during the main phase. It's very, very nice. I love this card. Speaking of cards that I love, this card right here, Mihikarihime. This reduces our next Soul Blast cost by 3, and it doesn't care about names at all, so if we have to Soul Blast specifically Regalias, this still reduces it by 3. Very nice, makes all of our skills that much cheaper. This card is basically 3 Regalia names wrapped up into 1 card, and it's not even a Regalia name. So yes, Mihikarihime, very, very good card. Want to play it at 4, absolutely. Speaking of cards we want to play at 4, the last one we have in the main deck is Fetter of Leather Leyding. This is a grade 0 card, so it's a little awkward to have in the main deck, but its skill is just so, so good. It turns our next Soul Blast into essentially a chamomile, which lets us call it to rearguard after we Soul Blast it out. It also generates some soul in and of itself, which is, like, fine. You know, generally we want, like, Regalia names in Soul, but, like, it makes for Divine Gauge, I guess. You can be Divine Gauge, Leyding. I swear, you have a use, I guess. But yeah, just making any of our Soul Blasts into cameos is really, really nice. Cards that are less nice, though, Unappeasable, Biter, Gleipnir. We really don't have the counterblast to be slinging this around. Between Yggdrasil, Norn, and our strides, we have a lot of counterblast sinks into this deck, so we cannot use this all the time, which is why I have it at 2 copies. Frankly, every time I look at this card, I want to lower it in copies. It's really, really nice because it lets you use your soul as a sort of toolbox by grabbing cards out of it, but at the same time, you just can't afford it most of the time. And it's also not a Regalia name. Every card in this deck that is not a Regalia name has to have a reason to be in this deck, a really good reason to not be in this deck without being a Regalia name. Like Mihikarihime is basically an honorary Regalia because she ignores the naming convention. One card that definitely does make up for not being a Regalia name, Astraia of the Full Heavens. This card's kind of weird, but I really like it at 1 copy. It helps in certain corner cases. You can on-place draw a card and put a card to bottom of deck. This helps you put back any cards that you accidentally draw into that you don't really want to hold on to. Like, for example, if you draw into your over trigger, you can put it back. It's interesting. It's not the most amazing card. I have it at 1 for a reason. It's pretty good at 1, but probably don't put in more. And like I said, we are playing the over trigger. This means we're not playing Ultima, but we do have access to essentially the best over trigger in the game, in my opinion. The Keter Sanctuary one, Amartanoa, is just so strong. Here we have the Heal Guardians, playing 4 of these. If you are in an era before V Collection, do not worry, you do not need to play Heal Guardians. You can play just normal V heals, that is perfectly fine, don't even worry about it. The Heal Guardians are better, so if you have access to them, absolutely slot them in, but if they don't exist yet in your timeline, then don't even worry about it. We are playing 4 draw PGs. I don't really like this, but we don't have room for grade 1 PGs in the deck, unfortunately, even though there is a pretty decent Regalia PG, but we just don't have room. The draw doesn't do us a whole lot. This deck draws fine on its own. We kind of want more crits, or more Regalia names, but we had to put in PGs somewhere just because of how volatile Premium is right now, and unfortunately this was the best slot I could find for him. Speaking of crits, we're playing 7 crits. We're playing 4 of the Stride Fodder crits and 3 of the Put Soul crits. You can swap these ratios around however you want. I don't really care. I like the Stride Fodder crits a little better. I think most people do, but it doesn't really matter if you want to turn this into a soul crit or whatever you want to do. If you want to take this out and put in like a Dreaming Dragon, whatever you want to do is perfectly fine, but I like this little ratio of 4 and 3. It works just fine for me. As for our strides, we have a couple things going on. First off, we have our 3 main win conditions for the deck. Our primary win condition is this one, Ultimate Regalia of Almighty Minerva. This is what we need Regalia names for. She Soul Blasts specifically Regalia names to activate both her skills, and she lets us swing with Quadruple Drive and restand all of our Regalia names. So what you'll do with her is you'll swing with her, you'll restand her with Norn, you'll swing with her again, you'll restand all of your Regalia names, and you'll swing with her a 3rd time. So you get 3 Vanguard swings, the first with Quad Drive, the second with Triple Drive, the third unfortunately won't have any drive checks because of the combination of her skill and Norn's taking away drive checks, but it's still really, really good just to have 3 Vanguard swings. So yes, this is a very, very powerful card, and the one that we most commonly go into because it's generally the most useful against most of our matchups, but it is very matchup reliant. Like our second win condition, Amaruda. Amaruda is a really nice first stride if we can't get the GB3 to get our Minerva off, because she generates us resources. She can draw 2 cards and soul charge 5 with her first skill, which is really, really nice. And if we can get our second skill off, which is Soul Blast 15, Mihikarihime helps a lot here, we can restand one of our rears and give everything Sentinel Restrict until end of turn. This just auto-wins certain Protect matchups, so it's really nice to have access to. Essentially a second win condition against those matchups. And our 3rd and final win condition is Prehistoric Regalia Urth. This is definitely the silliest win condition, but it comes up sometimes, and it's really fun when it does. Basically, how Urth works is you stare your opponent dead in the face, knowing they have at most 1 PG in hand, you swing at them with a 6 crit Vanguard with something like 70,000 power, and you know it's gonna restand. It's very silly, it one-punches your opponents out of the game, it's really fun to do. Play Urth, she's a really fun card. Muspel, on the other hand, is a card we kind of have to play. She is the only really good stride, and good in quotations, that doesn't cost counterblast, so if we get hard damage denied and want to generate some resources, Muspel is here to make up for it. You go into her sometimes, but you generally don't want to too much. Marduk is an interesting one. We can go into Marduk when our opponent is on grade 2, so he helps us generate GB if we went first to get ready for our Minerva turns right away, so that's really nice. Also helps us get triple drive without actually having to pay stride cost, so that's kind of cool. The problem is Counterblast 1 Soul Blast 6 is kind of a heavy cost for this deck especially, so we don't always have the resources to pay for it, but he's here when we can have access to him, and he's really, really nice to go into. For our G Guardians, we're only playing 5 because that's generally more than enough. Ear is generally the one you want to be going into. She takes up to 4 cards from drop zone and puts them into soul and gains shield based on the cards put, but they all have to have different grades. So what do we do if we don't have enough different grades in our drop? Well, then we go into Iris, who can take any 3 cards in drop zone and put them into soul. Essentially the same thing, but we don't get that 4th card in. She also gets slightly less shield, so that can be relevant in some instances. But if we don't have enough to fulfill Ear's full condition, Iris is there to help us out just a little bit and help us generate some soul, if not as much. And our last G-Guardian is 2 copies of Witch Queen of Accomplishment Laurier. This lets us put cards from Drop Zone and Soul back into deck. This specifically is really nice to recycle our Norns into deck. If we run out of copies of them by our opponent getting rid of them, we can put them back into deck, search them out with Yggdrasil's skill, and use them again. Very, very nice to reuse those, as well as a few other cards that we like to reuse and just put back into deck. Also, it helps prevent deck out, because we are not playing Dreaming Dragon in this list, so this definitely comes up sometimes, just stop us from losing the game. And there you go, that's basically the deck list. Main deck, triggers, and G-Zone over here. That's that. It's a very, very good deck, very strong deck, and I have a few other things to show you about it if you're interested, but if you only want the deck list, here it is. Enjoy! Of course, when we're talking about any deck that has gift markers, we also have to talk about what gift is better for this deck, and there's no real contest in this deck. There's just no reason to go into Force 1 ever. Force 2 is so powerful for this deck, especially since most of your attacks are restanders, so getting to swing in with extra crit is just amazing. We already have plenty of skills that give us more than enough power to swing in. We don't really care about Force 1 at all. And, of course, like some other decks, we're not really stacking force markers. We're usually only getting 1 or 2 every game because we only get them by normal riding, which we don't do every single turn. So yeah, hard Force 2 deck. Hard Force 2 deck. Don't even bother with Force 1. Just bring your Force 2s. Alright, so now I have a couple deck tech options if you want to change up the deck a little bit. Here's just a few of the ideas that I had. Of course, you can feel free to change out things as much as you want. First off, we have this girl, Regalia Benevolent Wind Flap Angel. She lets you reveal a grade 3 Regalia in your hand and search out Yggdrasil. She technically searches out any grade 3 Regalia, but you will search out Yggdrasil. Also, she's stride fodder if that comes up, which it does sometimes, and another Regalia name, so she's pretty good. This next area Regalia Scold is potentially the best Regalia that nobody is playing. I've only seen pure variants playing this, and even then, only some of them play it. It puts 3 Regalias from your drop zone onto the bottom of your deck at the end of your turn. If you Soul Blast at least 3 this turn, then you get to draw a card and Soul Charge, excuse me. It's such free advantage, though. It's so good. It recycles your Regalias. This is just an incredible card. Like, honestly, if I were to add anything to the main deck, I would absolutely consider Skuld first, even though it is a 5k shield and 7k body. It's so worth it, in my opinion. Here we have kind of a funny card. This card is used in my free premium version of the list. Twilight Hunter Artemis gains 10k power for each of her Divine Gauge, and gains the Divine Gauge every time she successfully hits. So she just gets up to like 50k power, and her second skill is a continuous. So she's 50k even during the opponent's turn, and then you're on Yggdrasil / Angelica, so she can't be targeted by effects. It's just really, really funny. It's not a particularly good card, but it's definitely just a funny thing to think about. One card that is particularly good, though, is this card, Dreaming Dragon. A lot of lists will play this at a single copy. If you're ever in a situation where you're close to decking out, Dreaming Dragon can absolutely come in clutch, recycle your entire drop zone into your deck, and also let you draw a card after that. It's really, really good for just resetting the game state if you feel like you're about to die. Personally, it didn't come up enough in testing that I was getting close to deck out that I felt I needed to include Dreaming Dragon. If you feel you need it, I would recommend taking out a Tablet Angel. But yeah, I personally don't think you need it, but it's not bad. Speaking of cards that are not bad, Witch of Big Pots Laurier. This is just the V-Heal. Like I said, if you don't have Heal Guardians, V-Heals are perfectly fine in this deck. The effects are better and make the deck better on the Heal Guardians, but they're not needed to make the deck keep up. The V-Heals are perfectly fine on their own. This is an interesting one, Supportive Sorcerer Calmness. He lets you Soul Charge 2 on place. The problem is he's not a Regalia name. If he was a Regalia name, I'd probably be playing him because Soul can be a bit of an issue with this deck, so some random Soul Charging does not go amiss at all, and his Vanguard skill of letting you put a card from Soul and draw a card is really, really good on its own, but unfortunately, since he's not a Regalia name, I can't quite justify him. This card is another card I can't quite justify. Agnos is interesting. Making all your strides free is good, but we don't really care about the stride I'd cost most of the time in this deck. We have our stride fodder crits, we have plenty of excess grade 3s, we don't really need it. And Counterblast 1's Soul Blast 1 is actually kind of a cost for this deck because so much of our deck requires Counterblasts and so much of our deck requires Soul. It's actually kind of a relevant cost. The other thing, of course, is just you generally don't have an empty enough field to make the call as many cards from your hand as possible, draw 3 cards. It's not usually advantageous to do that because your field usually doesn't have enough cards on it, so you have to just call your entire hand, and now bye-bye hand, which is never fun. We also have a second copy of Iris. This is an interesting idea. Some people played this in Fenrir. It's really good because it doesn't require specific grades like Ear does, and you could potentially put this over the second copy of Laurier, so you could go 2 and 2 with this and Ear. It's an option. That's kind of getting into the little nitpicking of ratios and stuff though, so you can decide for yourself if you think that's good. I think it's fine as is without the second Iris, but she's certainly not bad. This card I kind of want to make space for, but I don't really at the same time. Ractome / Agleam just lets you itch a card to draw another card, so it's kind of cycling. It's pretty nice, but personally I didn't think it was quite good enough to make a spot in the G-Zone. I could take out one of the Mardukes for it potentially, or maybe the second copy of Laurier. I'm not quite sure. It's good, but I don't think it's good enough to warrant a spot. The one card that is probably good enough to warrant a spot, though, is Dismal. Dismal is incredibly good in this deck because one card that 100% deserves a spot in this deck, if you can find space for it, is this Dark Element Dismal. We already have some protection for our rearguards because of our strong Yggdrasil skill and our strong Angelica skill. However, our opponent can still hit our rearguards, and while they do have increased power because of Angelica, 18k on an Yggdrasil in premium, it's not exactly a tall order for most decks to hit into, so being able to just say, "Hi, I'm Dismal, you're not allowed to attack my rearguards. I need to keep those between turns, keep up my board presence, keep my divine gauges going," is really, really nice to be able to say, and it absolutely comes up sometimes, so he's nice to have in the deck. I personally couldn't find enough space for him, but if I were to choose anything in this little deck text section to put into the deck, I think Dismal would be my first choice. Very strong card, very good in this deck in particular. Definitely find space for it if you can. And, well, that's about all I have to show you. Of course, there's still some nuances to this deck that I haven't shown off. I can't do everything in a single video. This deck is actually surprisingly complicated and difficult to play, so definitely give it a try, do some testing on your own, figure out exactly what makes this deck tick and what makes it so strong, because it is a very, very powerful deck and a very fun one to pilot. I especially love the aesthetic personally, but that's just me, of course. So, if you want to give Regalias a try, here you go. Either way, I've been Mimine, this has been HoukagoCardTime, thanks so much for showing up, this has been our club for today, and we'll see y'all in the next one. Thank you so much, bye bye, it's been a blast.